Yo, what's happening, YouTube? Afro Cuban here, and I'm back with another video of building my cinematic universe. Now, for those who don't know, this is a video series on my YouTube where I essentially create my own cinematic universe from scratch. In other words, this is what my DC movie universe would be like, meaning that if I was the one in charge of running a DC cinematic universe, these are the movies that I would put out, and these are the stories and character arcs that I would tell. And just for the record, these are all my original script ideas and stories. Dramatic and heartfelt stories that cohesively connect and span across multiple arcs and phases, just like the real life MCU and DCU. Now, without further ado, let's get into my next script. This is my Flash sequel, Flashpoint Paradox. And in this video, we got a lot of stuff to get into. So you guys better grab a snack and get comfortable because we are in for a major roller coaster ride of drama and emotions. Okay, so first things first, let it be known right off the bat that this movie mostly takes place during that blank time period during my first Justice League video where I had mentioned that the Flash was missing. So this movie will fill in the blanks as to where the Flash was and what he was doing during that time. And also in my universe, my version of Flashpoint Paradox story will be very different from what fans have been accustomed to in the past. And you'll see what I mean as the story plays out. But let's just say that I've changed certain aspects of the story in order to keep things simple and cohesive to what I've already established in my universe. But alright, let's get the movie started. Okay, so when the movie starts off, we immediately pick back up where my first Flash movie left off. Flash and the Reverse Flash are both standing in Barry's childhood home. They are in the kitchen, staring at each other, with Nora Allen, Barry's mom, on the kitchen floor in between them. She's scared and confused and doesn't know what's going on. Reverse Flash is vibrating himself so that it's hard to see his face. And then he finally speaks, but his voice is modulated because of the vibration. Reverse Flash says, "We were always meant to end up here, Barry. It is our fate, our destiny, to do this dance over and over again." Flash then yells, "Who are you?" Reverse Flash then says, "In a way, I am the one who created you. Without me, there is no Flash, and without Flash, there is no me. The death of Nora Allen is the spark that ignites both of our destinies." Reverse Flash then pulls out a knife, the same electrified knife that first gave Barry his powers. And then Henry Allen runs into the kitchen to see what's going on, and that's when Flash and Reverse Flash charge at each other and begin fighting. Now, they're both moving so fast that it looks like a red and yellow tornado is whirling around in the kitchen. But then we transition to a slow mo shot to get a better look at the fight. And that's when we see Reverse Flash slam Barry into the wall. And then he zips over to stab Nora. But that's when Barry runs over at the last second and puts his hand in front of the blade to stop it from stabbing his mother. Barry gets stabbed in his hand, and then with his other hand, he uppercuts Reverse Flash and sends him flying into the next room. Reverse Flash then stands back up, and he has an angry and confused look on his face. And then he says, "No, what have you done? You've just disrupted a tethered branch in the timeline. Nora Allen is the key. She is supposed to die." Barry then slowly lifts his head, and he has a determined look in his eyes as he pulls the knife out of his hand and then says, "Nora Allen does not die today." And then Reverse Flash just stands there, still with a confused look on his face. Him and Barry just stare at each other for a few seconds, and then Reverse Flash super speeds away and leaves. Flash then turns around and sees his dad on the floor. He's unconscious but still alive. And then he looks over at his mother as she's still sitting on the kitchen floor. She's confused and terrified, but she's still alive as well. And then that's when younger Barry comes running into the kitchen and hugs his mother. Flash then smiles at them and says, "You're safe now. Everything is going to be okay." And then he whispers it back to himself, "Everything is going to be okay." And then Flash super speeds away and runs back to the present timeline. Now, that entire scene was just the intro. This is where we see the title screen, Flashpoint Paradox. And now we get into Act 1. So we see Barry wake up back in his apartment, back in the present timeline. And he jumps up and begins looking around. And for the most part, everything seems normal. So Barry is now wondering if everything that he just experienced was actually a dream. But then his phone rings and it's a FaceTime call from his mom. So Barry begins to panic because it appears that his mom is still alive, which means that the fight that he just had against Reverse Flash and him saving his mom in the past actually did happen. So Barry answers the phone, and both his mom and his dad are on the phone and they appear to be happy. His mom and dad are laughing and smiling as they both talk to Barry. And Barry is holding back tears after seeing both of his parents are happy and well. His mom is alive and his dad isn't in prison. So after Barry gets off the phone, he's now in a good mood. But then he realizes that he's late for work. So he tries to super speed to work, but instead he only runs at normal speed. And then he trips and falls, scraping the side of his leg. Barry then notices that the cut on his leg isn't healing, so that's when he realizes that his powers are gone. Barry figures that his powers must have been some kind of collateral for saving his parents, but he doesn't care. As long as his parents are both well, he doesn't care about having powers. So Barry decides to take the train to work. Now, when Barry is on the train, this is when he starts to notice certain changes to this timeline. For example, there's a TV screen on the train and it's showing some kind of commercial about joining a church. But in the commercial, he sees that people are kneeling inside of a church and praying, but instead of praying to a cross, they are kneeling and praying in front of an omega symbol. Barry finds the commercial weird, but he doesn't pay too much attention to it. But then, after the church commercial ends, a presidential press conference comes on, and the president appears to be Lex Luthor. So now, Barry is confused, and he's wondering why and how is Lex Luthor the president. But then, out of nowhere, the train stops abruptly. And then we hear gunfire and commotion coming from outside of the train. So now the citizens on the train begin to panic and run for the exit. But Barry is curious and decides to go and see what's going on. So he crawls closer to the gunfire and peeks around the corner, and that's when he sees Batman. But Batman looks different. He's wearing some kind of trench coat instead of a cape, and he's also using machine guns. Batman also appears to be leading some kind of group of rebels, and this rebel group consists of Harley Quinn, Deathstroke, a couple of regular human mercenaries, and some kind of man whose body is half machine. And then his arm turns into some kind of cannon, and he fires a bunch of pulse blasters from his arm. Now, for those wondering, this is our first introduction of Cyborg. So Barry then decides to get a little closer to the action and get a better look to find out what's going on. And then he sees that the rebels are having a shootout with a bunch of parademons. Now Barry doesn't understand what's going on, so he just continues watching with a confused look on his face. But then that's when a parademon sneaks up behind Barry while he's distracted. But then Batman shoots the parademon in the head. And then he grabs Barry and yells, "What the hell do you think you're doing? Stay down!" Batman then yells, "Cyborg, we're compromised. Get us out of here." So then Cyborg opens a small portal and the rebels jump through it and escape along with Barry. Now the rebels are then transported to a hidden underground bunker where they've been stationed and hiding out. And that's when Batman walks up and grabs Barry by the neck and slams him against the wall and says, "Who the hell are you? Are you trying to get yourself killed? You've just jeopardized an important recon mission." Barry then tries to explain to Batman that something is wrong and the world that he has returned to is somehow different. Barry says, "Where I come from, Harley Quinn is a wanted criminal, and the Batman, he never uses guns. So something isn't right." And that's when Batman removes his mask. But it's not Bruce Wayne, it's his father, Thomas Wayne. Now, at this point in his life, Barry doesn't know Batman. So he doesn't know that Bruce Wayne is supposed to be Batman. But he does know for sure that Thomas Wayne is supposed to be dead. So Barry then says, Thomas Wayne? That's impossible. You died decades ago. You and your wife were shot and killed. Thomas then says, and what about Bruce? And Barry goes, Bruce, your son. Yeah, he's alive. Wait, oh my God. So now Barry puts two and two together and realizes that if Thomas Wayne is alive and he's Batman in this reality, then 9 times out of 10, Bruce Wayne must be Batman back in his original timeline. So Thomas then releases Barry and explains that in this universe, things happen differently for him. He explains that in this timeline, both Bruce and Martha were the ones who were shot and killed, and Thomas is the one who eventually took the mantle of Batman. Now, quick side note. I want to briefly explain what's going on in my story. You see, I already know that in the comics and in most known media, that when fans think of the Flashpoint storyline, they are normally thinking of a story where Thomas Wayne becomes Batman and Martha becomes Joker after Bruce is the one who was killed. And there's some kind of war going on between Wonder Woman and Aquaman. But you see, in my version of Flashpoint Paradox, in order to keep things fresh, I would have it to where Thomas Wayne does become Batman, but Martha and Bruce were the ones who were killed. And as for the war between the Atlanteans and the Amazons, that doesn't exist in my universe, because that would just overcomplicate the plot. So there's no war between Wonder Woman and Aquaman. They're not even a part of this story. Now, as for the rebels fighting against the parademons, that will be explained as the story goes on. We'll get to that later. But okay, back to the story. This is where we get into Act 2. Okay, so after some time goes by, we then learn that Batman and his group of rebels are planning a way to break into LexCorp. Barry asks why, and Batman explains that they have intel that Lex Luthor has some kind of secret weapon and the rebels want to steal it so they can use it to end the war. Barry is confused and still doesn't really understand what's going on. And not to mention, at this point, he has never even seen a parademon before. So Barry then asks, what war? And what the hell were those things you guys were fighting in the train station? Cyborg then walks over and explains that they were parademons, an alien army loyal to Darkseid. Barry then says, what? Or who the hell is a Darkseid? Everyone then gets quiet and looks at Barry like he's crazy. Batman then says, you don't know who Darkseid is? And that's when Cyborg gives Barry the full backstory on Darkseid and the current war. He explains that Darkseid came to Earth to collect the last Mother Box, and he was able to activate the anti-life equation. Now, Batman and a couple of other heroes were able to not succumb to Darkseid's will, all thanks to Green Lantern's sacrifice. Batman and his allies were hiding inside of a LexCorp building when Darkseid activated the anti-life equation, and Green Lantern was able to use every ounce of sheer willpower he had to generate a force field to shield off the LexCorp building, protecting everyone inside and saving them from becoming slaves of Darkseid. That included Batman, Cyborg, Deathstroke, Robin, Joker, Harley Quinn, Lex Luthor, and a couple of dozen LexCorp employees. But then, afterwards, Green Lantern was so weak after generating this force field that when Darkseid invaded LexCorp, Green Lantern had no power left to defend himself, and Darkseid used his Omega Beam and disintegrated Green Lantern on the spot. Now, after Green Lantern was killed, Cyborg was able to open a portal so that the remaining survivors can escape at the last second, and they all went into hiding while the rest of the universe became slaves of Darkseid. Batman then started his rebellion team, and most of the LexCorp employees became mercenaries in Batman's rebel army. Lex, Joker, Deathstroke, and Harley also joined Batman's rebellion, along with Cyborg and Robin. and they operated underground while trying to find a way to bring the world back to normal. But then, one day, out of nowhere, Lex betrayed the rebels and joined Darkseid. And because of his betrayal, the location of one of Batman's underground bunkers were found out, and when the parademons attacked the bunker, it led to the death of Joker and Robin. Lex was then rewarded by Darkseid, and that's how Lex became the president. Now, as for Darkseid, he eventually left Earth because he has other planets and an entire universe to dictate and rule, so he can't just stay on Earth all the time. So he left Steppenwolf and Lex Luthor in charge of Earth and gave them a small army of parademons to command in his absence. And so, after Cyborg finishes giving this backstory, Batman then says, "And this is why we need to get that weapon. We're hoping that it's strong enough to hurt Darkseid. And if it is strong enough to hurt him, maybe we can use it to force him to restore the world back to normal." Barry then says, "Okay, but what about that guy from Metropolis, Superman? Why don't we just get him to help us?" Batman and the others all have a look of confusion. And then Batman says, "What the hell is a Superman?" So apparently, Superman doesn't exist in this timeline either. And so the rebels finally gear up and make their way to LexCorp. And as the rebels are making their way through the city, they come across a number of parademons who patrol and occupy the streets like it's martial law. The rebels also come across a bunch of regular humans who are in the middle of building a dark side statue and throne. The rebels then get spotted by the parademons and a gunfight breaks out in the streets. The rebels are battling and shooting it out with the parademons, and Barry still doesn't have his powers, so at the moment he's just using a regular gun to try and help fend off the parademons. But then the humans that were building the statue also join in on the fight. They all yell, "For Darkseid!" and they all charge in towards the rebels. But Batman makes quick work of the humans. He's shooting them in the head and snapping their necks. And when Barry sees this, he's devastated. So he runs over and grabs Batman and tells him to stop killing the people that they're trying to save. But Batman just grunts and pushes Barry out of his way. And once all of the parademons and the brainwashed humans are all taken out, the rebels finally reach LexCorp. And when they enter the building, Cyborg pulls up a hologram blueprint of the building. And in the hologram, they see a blinking dot below their location. Cyborg then says, "The weapon is downstairs. There's a secret elevator that will take us down." So the rebels find this secret elevator and head to the lower levels. But when they get down there, an alarm starts going off. So now the rebels must move fast to find this weapon. And that's when they come across some kind of giant glass cage. And inside this cage, there's some kind of bright red light. And then, as Batman and the rebels get closer to the cage, they notice that there's a man inside of the cage. He's curled up in the corner, sitting on the floor with his head down. So, Cyborg finally hacks into the security system and shuts off the alarm. And then Batman unplugs all of the machines that are hooked up to this cage, shutting off the red lights and unlocking the glass doors. And once the red lights shut off, the man then slowly lifts his head and his eyes start to glow red. The man in the cage is revealed to be Superman, but he's very weak and very skinny. So it appears that Lex has been keeping him in captivity this whole time, locked inside of some kind of red solar energy cage, running experiments on him. Batman then says, "This must be the weapon." Barry then says, "No, this is Superman. Come on, we have to help him. We have to get him out of here." So then the rebels help Superman to his feet and help carry him out of the building. But when the rebels get outside, they see Steppenwolf waiting outside with a bunch of parademons. Batman and the others draw their guns and prepare to fight. But now that they are outside, this is when Superman will get a slight boost of energy and his powers begin to slowly come back. So Superman begins to levitate, and then he releases a powerful heat vision blast that immediately disintegrates almost all of the parademons. But then Superman passes out and falls back down to the ground. So now Steppenwolf is angry, so he pulls out his flaming axe and lunges towards the rebels. But Cyborg quickly opens a portal and the rebels escape at the last second with Superman. And now we get into Act 3. So Steppenwolf and Lex are back at LexCorp having an argument. Steppenwolf is accusing Lex of harboring a Kryptonian without informing Lord Darkseid. And then, right at that moment, is when a boom tube opens up behind them. And then out comes Granny Goodness, Darkseid's main general and second in command of Apocalypse. But then, right behind her, we see Darkseid himself also come walking out. Now, Darkseid doesn't say a word, he just has a furious look on his face. And then Granny Goodness pulls out some kind of flaming whip, and then she says, "You've been a naughty boy, Lex. You must be punished for your insolence." Lex then puts his finger to his ear and yells, "I've been made! Get me out of here!" And then a portal opens up right behind Lex and he quickly jumps through it. The portal leads back to the rebel base. So it appears Lex has been working with the rebels this whole time and only pretended to betray them so that he can gain access to Darkseid's inner circle so he can possibly find any weaknesses or a way to reverse the anti-life. And so when Lex reunites with the rebels, Batman quickly grabs Lex by his shirt and yells, "Why didn't you tell us the weapon was a man?" Lex pushes Batman off of him and says, "What will be the point? The plan worked, didn't it? He may be our only hope at defeating Darkseid." And so now the rebels are all gearing up and preparing for a last stand against Darkseid. They know that some of them will not make it back alive, but they're all hoping that Superman will lead them to victory and defeat Darkseid. But the only problem is that this is a weak and skinny version of Superman. So Barry has his doubts that Superman alone will be able to end this war. So Barry comes up with a plan to get his powers back. Barry asks a cyborg to transport him to his forensic lab in Central City so he can attempt to recreate the events that gave him his powers before. So when Barry gets to his lab, he gets a bunch of chemicals together, but he doesn't have a way to create lightning. So he builds his own electric chair with a lightning rod attached to it. And once everything is put together, Barry sits in the chair and turns it on. Barry electrocutes himself, but his plan doesn't work. The electricity just leaves his entire body burned and scarred. So Cyborg helps Barry to his feet and tries to bring him back to the rebel base, but Barry yells no and tells Cyborg to put him back in the chair so he can try again. Cyborg is hesitant because he knows that if Barry fails again, he will most likely die. But Barry continues to insist. So Cyborg sets him back in the chair and Barry turns the chair back on. Barry electrocutes himself again. But this time, something goes wrong, and the chair starts to overheat and begins smoking. But then, some kind of yellow lightning strikes the chair, and then the chair explodes. The room is then filled with smoke, but in the smoke, we can see some kind of golden electricity crackling in the air. And then, when the smoke clears, we see Barry standing there with his wounds healed and electricity crackling around his body. Barry's powers are now back. The Flash has returned. And so Flash and Cyborg both return to the Rebel base, and the Rebels are all geared up and ready to go. But then Flash notices that Superman is sitting in the corner by himself with a sad look on his face. So Flash goes up to him to see what's wrong. And then Superman tells him that he doesn't want to fight or hurt anyone. So Flash gives Superman some words of encouragement and tells him that where he comes from, Superman is a symbol for hope and courage, and he is considered the greatest superhero who has ever lived because no matter what, he was always willing to put everything on the line to make sure the planet and the people that he loved were safe. And these words of encouragement puts a smile on Superman's face, and then he stands up and says, "I'm ready." Barry then smiles and says, "And that's why you're my hero." And so now we finally get ready for the final battle. And we cut to Metropolis and we see Darkseid sitting on the throne that was built for him. And by his side are his main generals, Steppenwolf and Granny Goodness, along with an army of parademons and hundreds of regular civilians who are brainwashed and ready to die for their Lord Darkseid. And so that's when we see the rebels finally come through a portal, prepared to fight. Batman is standing in the front, and he then yells out at Darkseid and says, "Release Earth and its Earthlings from your anti life tyranny and nepotism, and I promise we won't kill you." Granny Goodness then steps forward and says, "Mind your tongue when addressing your new god." Batman then turns to his men and says, "Take them down by any means necessary." And then Batman looks at Flash with a smile on his face and says, "But don't harm the humans. We don't want to kill the people that we're trying to save." Flash also starts smiling. And then the rebels charge in and start fighting against the parademons and the brainwashed humans. It's an epic action scene, and we see that the rebels are holding their own and taking out parademons left and right, while also knocking out any humans they come across. It's an explosive climactic battle. But then Steppenwolf and Granny Goodness finally decide to join the fight. And when they join in, the tide of the battle drastically shifts. Steppenwolf and Granny Goodness are wiping out members of the rebels left and right with ease. Majority of the mercenary rebels are all killed and disintegrated by Steppenwolf's axe. Steppenwolf even kills Harley Quinn. Steppenwolf shoves his axe into her stomach and she just laughs as her body turns into ash. Granny Goodness then summons her female Furies, and together, Granny and her Furies gang up on Batman and Deathstroke. Deathstroke is holding his own for a while against the Furies, but eventually they swarm and overwhelm him, and Deathstroke gets killed in the battle as well. And so now it comes down to a standoff between Batman and Granny Goodness. And Batman is pulling out all of the stocks. He's throwing grenades and using different kinds of machine guns, but none of which have any effect on Granny Goodness. So then Granny eventually manages to get her hands on Batman and slams him into the ground. And then she wraps her whip around Batman's neck and tightens it until he can't breathe. Flash is in the middle of fighting some parademons, but then he turns and sees Batman about to be killed by Granny Goodness. Flash then yells, "No!" And Batman slowly glances at Barry and says, "Save them, Barry. Save them for Bruce." And then Granny Goodness yanks her whip and breaks Batman's neck. And so, meanwhile, while all of this is going on, Superman is fighting against Steppenwolf. And Steppenwolf, for the most part, is getting the better of Superman. He's tossing Superman around, and then he slams Superman and pins him down on the ground. Superman then gets angry and shoots out a powerful heat vision blast. And his heat vision blasts a hole straight through Steppenwolf's chest. And Steppenwolf dies right there on the spot. So then we transition to Flash, Cyborg, and Lex Luthor as they are now fighting the Parademons and the female Furies. Cyborg then gets swarmed by the Furies, and then he gets impaled by one of their swords. And then they surround him and rip his arms off. But then at the last second, right before they finish him off, Cyborg sacrifices himself and he self destructs, taking out all of the Furies along with him. And so Flash and Lex are now fighting against Granny Goodness, while Superman is busy taking out the rest of the parademons. Lex is also using a bunch of guns, but as we already saw, guns have no effect on Granny Goodness. So then Granny finally catches up to Lex, and she wraps her whip around him, and then she ignites her whip and disintegrates Lex. His body is turned into ash on the spot. And so, after Superman finally gets rid of the remaining parademons, he flies over to fight Granny Goodness. And he fires his heat vision blast at her, but Granny Goodness blocks it with her hand. And then she starts laughing while also pushing the heat vision back. But then, while Granny Goodness is distracted and laughing, Flash runs over and takes her whip off of her waist and wraps it around her hand so that she can no longer defend herself. And then Superman uses his heat vision on her again, but this time he unleashes his full power and completely obliterates Granny Goodness. And so now Superman and Flash are the only ones left. And that's when they finally turn their attentions towards Darkseid. Now, Darkseid is sitting on his throne, and he doesn't appear to be fazed or concerned about the battle that just took place. Darkseid is just sitting there with a cocky smirk on his face, and then another boom tube opens up behind him. Darkseid then stands up and says, Pitiful earthlings, you are all such impudent creatures. You'd rather fight and resist the inevitable when the alternative choice was rather easier. You simply needed to surrender and relinquish your will to the mercy of Darkseid, and I would have let you continue on with your foolish lives and your inadequate laws. But now, I no longer have any further use or amusement for this wretched planet. So once my remaining furies dispatches of you, I will reduce this rock to mere ashes. There will be nothing left except a cloud of dust where Earth used to be. And then, once Darkseid finishes his speech, that's when the rest of his female Furies all come marching through the boom tube, which just so happens to be an army of Amazons. And in the front, leading this army, are two females, one of which is Wonder Woman. She draws her sword and yells, For Darkseid! And the other female is a young girl with blonde hair. She slowly begins to levitate in the air as her eyes start to glow red. She appears to be Kryptonian. Superman then turns and whispers to Flash, You gotta get out of here, Barry. I'll hold them off. And then he yells, Run! As he charges in and flies towards the army of Furies. But then Superman instead flies directly past the female Furies and flies directly towards Darkseid. But Darkseid quickly reacts and he stops Superman dead in his tracks, catching him by his throat. Darkseid's eyes begin to flame up. And then, with his last breath, Superman yells, Run, Barry! Run! And Darkseid uses his Omega Beam and completely obliterates Superman. Barry, after seeing this, turns around and takes off in the opposite direction. He runs away. And so, shortly after, Barry then stops on a beach and removes his mask. And he has tears in his eyes because Darkseid has won and there's nothing he can do about it. And that's when Barry hears a voice behind him. I told you, Barry. Nora's death is what we call a tethered branch. It's the only thing keeping the balance of your reality intact, and preventing her death will just cause everything to fall into chaos. Barry then turns around and sees it's Reverse Flash. Reverse Flash then says, You know what you have to do. Run, Barry. Run. And so Barry puts his mask back on and he charges up all of the Speed Force power he can muster. Lightning and electricity starts crackling around his body. And then Flash takes off across the ocean and runs back into the past. And he allows his mother to be killed so that the natural balance of his timeline can be restored. Barry then runs back to the future, to the same beach where he was before. But that's when a wormhole opens up over the ocean and we see the Justice League fighting against Steppenwolf. This is when, just like in my original Justice League video, Flash returns and comes through the wormhole and says, Sorry I'm late. And then the screen cuts to black. So now that pretty much wraps up the story on why Flash was missing and everything that he went through during that time period. So now we're at the ending of the movie, and this is pretty much like an epilogue scene. We are finally all caught up to current present events. So that means this is after the events of my Death of Superman movie and all that. So now we get a scene where Barry is standing over a memorial site for Superman. Barry is heartbroken because he has now basically witnessed Superman die twice. Barry just stands there for a few seconds, having a moment of silence to himself. And then he whispers, "That's why you're my hero." And then the screen fades to black one last time, and that's where the movie officially ends. And yeah, okay, guys, that was my version of the Flashpoint paradox. And like I said at the beginning, there was a lot that I wanted to get into. So that's why this is probably one of my longest scripts that I have written, because the Flashpoint story is a very pivotal and intricate time in Barry's life. There has been many different versions of Flashpoint told, and I wanted to make my version one that would also stand out, and one that also aligns with what I already have going on in my universe. So, in my Justice League video, I made sure to acknowledge Flash's disappearance as a main focal point of that story because I knew it would tie into this movie. So, in this movie, we find out everything that Flash was going through during that time period when he was missing. He was in an alternate timeline where Darkseid had already ruled the universe, and he had to watch all of Earth's heroes die. And that's why when Barry comes back to his regular timeline, he will do whatever it takes to not let a similar fate happen again to his friends. And that's why in the future, when it comes to stopping Darkseid for good, Barry will play a major part. Now, I can't go into too much detail right now on what part Barry will play. You'll just have to wait until we get to that point in time. But yeah, that's pretty much all I got for this video. And as always, if you guys found any plot holes or mistakes in my script, feel free to let me know in the comments below. And until then, be well, be great, and I will catch you nerds on the flip side.